great to be with you. We've got a relatively short amount of time. I was going to talk a little bit about some of the global perspectives we see, and Julien is going to translate that into the reality of what's happening in Canada. So hopefully that'll be of interest to you. So I'm John Denton. I run the International Chamber of Commerce. So we're in 170 countries, 70% is in the global south. I've actually just arrived here having been in Johannesburg in Africa at the G20, and prior to that at Belém, and then prior to that actually at APEC in Korea and ASEAN. And just a couple of observations, because we're talking about scale here. I think what we're actually seeing at the moment is not just a race for, I suppose, comparative advantage in AI, but actually is a race for regulatory approaches as well. And one of the real challenges we're seeing on the regulatory side is that whilst there's speed there's actually a lack of coherence. And that's actually causing a lot of problems. The other thing that we're seeing, and this is a lesson that we've learned, and hopefully administrators and regulators will learn quite quickly, is that unless the approach is taken is inclusive, and I mean inclusive, engaging with developing and emerging economies, then some of the progress we want to see will be thwarted, and some of the scaling up will be inhibited, and we'll end up with fragmentation. And that sort of inclusiveness will only happen if we actually ensure there's investment in infrastructure, investment in capability, and frankly, respect. Because the reality is not all innovation comes from Paris, not all innovation comes from advanced economies. Just having been again in Africa, we have a very big presence there. There's a lot of innovation there. And what people don't want to see is a loss of their sovereignty through this process. So yes, we see a lot of speed, we see a lot of investment, we see a lot of challenges because of the incoherence and lack of, I think, alignment. And then we also see a real risk because of the lack of inclusivity. We can turn that around, but maybe that's for our second round. So maybe Julien, tell us about the experience in Canada.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Julien Billot, the CEO of Scale AI. So Scale AI, we were created back in 2019 by the government of Canada. Our objective actually is twofold. The first objective is helping Canadian companies adopt AI, because obviously AI is a key tool for productivity, and Canada is a bit lagging behind in productivity. And so introducing AI into business processes, that's a great way actually to increase productivity. But at the same time, we want to have a Canadian AI industry ramping up. And so what we do basically is we give subsidies for Canadian companies to adopt AI on the condition that they use Canadian companies to build their solution and they let IP flowing into the ecosystem. So I really like what you say about inclusivity, John, because we are very eager in Scale AI to be, and in Canada globally, to be sure that AI is for every company. Not only big companies that are able to buy their own solutions, but also for second-tier companies. And what we try to do at Scale AI is really gearing all the AI ecosystem in Canada to be sure that smaller companies can actually have access to AI, because there's a lot of Canadian IP built thanks to our projects and to our products. And so a lot of smaller companies can also use AI, and not only big companies. To give you a magnitude of what we do, we have funded 200 projects for a global value of 1 billion Canadian dollars. On our side, we have invested 300 million Canadian dollars in terms of projects and subsidies. But the global value was more than $1 billion in projects. And actually a good half of this project was for small companies, and 2/3 of our funding went to SMEs, which is very important in terms of AI for everybody, I would say, in Canada.
But I find that really interesting, also the focus in Canada on ensuring small companies are involved. One of the interesting data points, look, we represent more than 50 million businesses, and of course many millions of those small, medium enterprises. One thing we're seeing, and we've just done quite a deep dive with the global business community, with the WTO on this, is that SMEs are actually amongst the most excited about the possibility of AI, and yet they're potentially the most thwarted because of this fragmentation we're seeing. And that's why it's also really important to understand that some of the gains that they will see, and there will be some gains that will just happen on the basis of new technology, new opportunity. But a steady state gain will not be the same as we would get if we actually invested in lifting up the infrastructure to support, I think, the operation of SMEs. In fact, we can see a 15% gain in productivity if we get that infrastructure right. As I was actually trying to allude to in my opening comments, whilst I see this regulatory incoherence, and whilst I see there's a lot of goodwill, there are stuff that needs to happen. There needs to be the investment in the infrastructure. There needs to be alignment around the standards for AI, because without that alignment, you will not get the scale. You need alignment for scale. You also need to ensure that we're investing in capability, because without investing in the capability, then you will not be able to have this inclusive opportunity. And also, when you start thinking about regulation, you've also got to start thinking about risk-weighted, evidence-based regulation as well. There's a habit to focus on one particular issue, and at the moment what we're also seeing, and this needs to be turned around, and we're working on this at the moment at the ICC, all the regulatory frameworks, all the codes of conducts are coming from the advanced economies. They will just not be accepted by developing and emerging economies. If the disaster of the inclusive tax framework at the OECD could teach us anything, it should teach us that unless developing and emerging economies are engaged from the bottom up in setting the frameworks that will govern the activities in their sovereign nations, then they will set up their own, and that will lead to fragmentation. So we at the ICC are trying to build that global platform. One of our, I suppose, roles in life is to put order where there's disorder, find certainty where there's uncertainty. But that's something that's really driving us at the moment, because the opportunities for business are so great if we get the actual mixture right. What do you think, Julien, about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, AI for SMEs, that's really the grail for every economy, because there's a lot of productivity improvements potentially in SMEs. There's also a lot of risk and opportunities perhaps I want to discuss. The big risk actually for countries is accelerating too much AI for SMEs. And specifically if you think about industry and strategy, industrial strategy, because right now there's not a lot of solutions available for SMEs, and the risk, if you subsidize adoption for SMEs too fast, you have basically a risk SMEs adopt just, let's say, US solutions. And of course, if you're in Canada right now, you don't want all your companies to use US solutions. You want them to use Canadian-based solutions. So there's a kind of parallel ramp-up between adoption and the growth of your own ecosystem. And when you think about SMEs, yes, you want your SMEs to adopt AI, but you want also to build your own industry at the same pace. I worked a lot in the telco industry. You don't want to do in AI what happened in the telco industry in Europe, which is basically subsidizing adoption and basically destroying the telco industry in Europe. That's not what you want to do in AI, and specifically in Canada, we are very concerned about matching our penetration of AI into industry versus our strategic development for our own industry in artificial intelligence. And that's very strategic and critical for our country. So thinking about SMEs, that's something as a country we need to have in mind, how to balance penetration for AI into SMEs versus building our own players so we have Canadian IP to be sold to these SMEs.
I find that a very interesting perspective. I suppose we have a model which is very different because we are a functioning global multilateral platform. So everything we build, we actually build on the basis that it will be a global platform. I'll give you an example using AI. One of the chilling realities is that a lot of economic activity does not happen because people do not have access to dispute resolution. It's just a simple fact. The cost of dispute resolution. And so there are something like $1.8 trillion worth of underutilized economic activity because of this chilling effect. So what we are doing at the ICC is using AI to build a global platform which will enable access to low-value dispute resolution, not just for SMEs, but frankly for value chain leaders as well all over the world. And we'll do that using AI because AI is very good at identifying the elements of a dispute, which often is actually one of the hardest things to get sorted out. And we'll use that model to move forward. So there's the advantage we have is that we'll build it as a global platform from day one, rather than trying to build it as something for a jurisdiction. And then we'll be able to pilot it and trial it all over the place. But frankly, AI will enable us to do this much faster. And for the ICC, we aim to be the most enabled organization that we can be. And I suppose the other thing that I find really interesting about the Canadian story is how sensibly you're using the money you have, because you can spend a lot of money badly in this game as well. But it looks like the way in which your model is set up is pretty well governed.
Yeah, but at the end, what you say is, when we have solutions available, how do we spread them internationally? Meaning scaling ecosystem is not only building your own ecosystem, it's also pushing your ecosystem abroad. And that's really a focus we had at Scale AI, and to be sure that any solutions that were built in Canada and efficient has an opportunity to be spread globally. So we were very present at VivaTech in 2024 and 2025. We created an event called All in Montreal around that, which is showcasing what we do in terms of ecosystem, to be sure that all the innovation that were built have an opportunity to be presented elsewhere. And actually that's working quite well. A very virtuous model we have for scaling is really, first of all, of course, create local demand. Be sure that this local demand should be satisfied with local solutions, but then be sure that these local solutions that were developed leveraging local demand can be presented elsewhere and globally, so we can build more global businesses and scale our ecosystem. So I think it's very nice because as you present your platform, every great innovation in AI should be available everywhere, and so should not be restricted to one small ecosystem. So I think that's really the way to build and scale our ecosystems long term.
Well, the idea of an inclusive world engaged and enabled by AI is great, but if we don't get these frameworks right that support it, one of the other pieces that come back to us from the focus groups we run, that for a lot of ordinary citizens, AI is just weird and is spooky, and they actually are very happy to see it regulated and regulated hard. The danger with that is it can actually suck the opportunity out of the technology and the advance we've made, which is why it's very important for AI protagonists to actually understand that there's a political battle to be won here as well. You should not assume that the citizenship just accepts everything you're doing as a common good, because frankly, they've been tested before with technology and some of the promises were not met. So getting that trust right is something that we're very focused on as well, because with trust, we will also be able to look at how we can scale responsibly.
And I mean, I totally agree, we are time out, but from a Scale AI perspective, we totally agree that we need to have a regulation. In every game, you need a referee, and so you need to have a referee in this AI world. That's absolutely critical from a trust perspective.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.